Lithuania's bold stand for democracy put it head-to-head with China, but the economic blowback is testing the country's resilience. After supporting Taiwan's independence, Lithuania faced crippling sanctions that slashed its exports to China by over 90%, sparking a national crisis. Now, Lithuania is searching for ways to balance its principles with economic survival, but it faces a stark question. Can a small nation hold its ground on the global stage, or must it bow to the pressure of economic giants?
Moving on, in a diplomatic breakthrough, Taiwan has opened a de facto embassy in Lithuania, brushing aside China's anger and opposition to the move. The Chinese Foreign Ministry warned Lithuania to immediately correct its mistake. The move prompted China to withdraw its ambassador to Lithuania and demanded Vilnius to do the same, which it eventually did. Taiwan's foreign ministry said that the opening would charter a new and promising course for its ties with Lithuania and that it will cherish this new friendship based on shared values. The foreign ministry also added that there was big potential to cooperation between the two industries. Semiconductors, lasers and fintech were the top agenda. Taiwan announced that its office in the city would be called the Taiwanese Representative Office in Lithuania. Lithuania has also decided to open its office in Taiwan, though no confirmed date has now been set for the same.
In 2021, the small Baltic nation of Lithuania made a daring move on the global stage by allowing Taiwan to open a representative office in its capital, Vilnius. This decision, which made Lithuania the first European country to take such a step, was widely seen as a principled stance in support of democracy and a bold assertion of Lithuania's sovereignty. However, it also provoked a strong and swift backlash from China, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation between the tiny country and the economic superpower. China, which views Taiwan as a breakaway province and insists that countries adhere to the One China policy, responded to Lithuania's actions with a series of sweeping sanctions and retaliatory measures. Major trade deals were abruptly severed, and Lithuanian imports were effectively frozen out of the Chinese market. The impact was severe and immediate, with Lithuanian exports to China dropping by over 90% in the months following the dispute. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi issued a stern warning, stating that countries would bear the consequences for crossing China on the sensitive issue of Taiwan. The economic fallout for Lithuania was significant and far-reaching, sending shockwaves through its economy and pushing the government into crisis mode. The country found itself grappling with the question of whether its diplomatic gamble had been worth the steep economic price it was now paying. Factories faced layoffs, businesses grappled with lost revenues, and the government scrambled to find ways to mitigate the damage.
Amid the worsening diplomatic ties over Taiwan de facto embassy row, Lithuania has expressed its regret over China's decision to downgrade ties. Beijing has reduced its level of diplomatic ties below ambassador level in protests after Taiwan established a representation office in Vilnius. It also expelled the Lithuanian ambassador as a mark of protest. Lithuanian foreign minister has said that while the nation adheres to One China policy, it has every right to expand cooperation with Taiwan.
Na, yra sakančių, kad tokios reakcijos buvo galima tikėtis. Kinija buvo informuota apie mūsų kelią į priekį ir žinojo tiek ankstesnius mūsų sprendimus, tiek jau vėliau ir Taivano apsisprendimą atidaryti.
China has time and again reiterated that Taiwan is its territory and Taipei has no diplomatic autonomy of its own. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has accused Lithuania of undermining its sovereignty. It has also said that relations with Lithuania will be downgraded to the level of charge d'affaires, an embassy's number 2 official. Beijing refuses to have official relations with governments that recognize Taiwan as a sovereign country. Taiwan and the mainland have been ruled separately since 1949, following a civil war. Lithuania has said it plans to open its own representative office in Taiwan.
Lithuania's decision to stand up to China had been driven by a desire to position itself as a European leader in the defense of democracy and sovereignty. The government, led by Prime Minister Ingrida Šimonytė, had hoped that its actions would inspire other European nations to reconsider their own ties with China and take a more assertive stance in the face of Beijing's growing influence. Lithuania, with its history of Soviet occupation and its deep commitment to democratic values, saw itself as uniquely positioned to take a principled stand against authoritarian powers. However, it appears that Lithuania may have underestimated the potential for economic retaliation from Beijing. While Lithuania had relied on the moral support of its allies to translate into concrete economic backing, the reality proved to be more complicated. The European Union, while offering diplomatic support, hesitated to risk its own substantial economic ties with China. Other European countries, wary of jeopardizing their trade relationships, were reluctant to follow Lithuania's lead. As a result, Lithuania found itself largely alone in facing the consequences of its actions, with a lack of tangible support from its partners. According to data from the State Data Agency, Lithuania's exports to China experienced significant fluctuations in recent years. In 2019 and 2020, Lithuania exported goods worth €208.1 million and €243.9 million to China, respectively. However, after Lithuania allowed Taipei to open its representative office in Vilnius in 2021, Beijing imposed de facto sanctions on Lithuania, resulting in a decline in exports to €170.8 million in 2021 and a further drop to €45.2 million in 2022. The real-world impacts were severe, with factories facing layoffs and businesses grappling with lost revenues. One Lithuanian factory owner, speaking to international media, described the situation as being left out in the cold, without access to the crucial Chinese market. As the economic crisis deepened, a growing domestic debate emerged within Lithuania over the balance between economic stability and moral stands. Opinion polls revealed a public increasingly split between those who prioritized the economy and those who supported the government's principled stance against China. Some critics argued that the government had acted recklessly, sacrificing the country's economic well-being for a largely symbolic gesture. Others, however, saw Lithuania's stand as a necessary and courageous act of defiance against an increasingly assertive China. A poll conducted in February showed that 44% of Lithuanians believed their country's economy would struggle without Chinese investments, and nearly two-thirds felt that Lithuania should not interfere in China's internal affairs. This change in stance reflected the difficult balance that small states often must strike between upholding their ideals and ensuring economic pragmatism. While principled stands are important, economic resilience is also essential for the long-term stability and well-being of a nation. Lithuania's experience highlighted the dilemma faced by small countries caught between their values and the practical realities of a globalized economy, where economic interdependence can be both a blessing and a curse. The situation in Lithuania contrasted sharply with the approach taken by other European states, many of which were deepening their economic ties with China even as Lithuania faced retaliation. Countries like Germany, for example, emphasized the importance of trade with China for Europe's overall economic stability, with leaders like Chancellor Angela Merkel arguing that engagement, rather than confrontation, was the best way to influence Beijing's behavior. This divergence in approaches revealed a fractured European front when it came to balancing values and interests in relation to China. Larger economies, with their significant trade ties, were able to prioritize economic considerations, while smaller nations like Lithuania were left more exposed to the consequences of values-driven policies. Despite the challenges it faced, Lithuania's predicament also presented an opportunity for a potential diplomatic reset with China. Beijing's own economic challenges, including slowing growth and trade tensions with the United States, combined with its interest in stabilizing key trading relationships, could create an opening for dialogue. For Lithuania, the need for economic relief after shouldering the costs of its stance made the prospect of a reset all the more pressing.
I will have a chance to raise another issue during our meeting today, which is a new page in coercion from China against Lithuania. We've endured trade restrictions. We've endured economic coercion for almost 2 years. Now it's way better, the situation. But unfortunately, there's a new front open. We call it the diplomatic coercion. Lithuania is unable to operate in Beijing because China unilaterally lowered the level of diplomatic relations with our country, therefore restricting the traveling between our two countries and all diplomatic operations. So I would like to inform about this my colleagues here during Gimnich meeting.
After 3 years of strained relations with China, sparked by Lithuania's approval of a Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius, which Beijing saw as a violation of the One China principle, there are signs that Lithuania is seeking to mend ties with the economic superpower. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda and the coalition government leader have recently expressed a willingness to repair relations with Beijing, signaling a potential shift in Lithuania's approach. Chinese experts argue that Lithuania has faced bitter consequences for its actions, which they see as Lithuania acting as a pawn of the United States to provoke China. They point out that Lithuania has seen more costs than gains from this stance, particularly at a time when many other European countries are seeking practical cooperation with China. According to Lithuanian news outlets, President Nausėda has expressed support for the government's desire to normalize diplomatic ties with China. He hopes that China will reverse its decision to downgrade diplomatic representation, and that ambassadors will return to their posts in both countries. This follows Nausėda's earlier call in May for improved relations with China and his suggestion that the representative office should use the name Taipei rather than Taiwan to align with international standards. Gintautas Paluckas, leader of Social Democratic Party of Lithuania, has also stated that his government will seek to restore full diplomatic relations with China and repair the rift caused by the Taiwan issue. Paluckas, whose Social Democratic Party won the recent parliamentary elections, has described Lithuania's decision to allow Taiwan to open a Taiwanese-named representative office as a grave diplomatic mistake. These remarks from Lithuanian leaders suggest that the new government is reflecting on its past choices and moving towards a more pragmatic approach to handling bilateral relations with China. Zhao Junji, a senior research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, sees this as a demonstration that adherence to the One China principle is the general trend and aspiration of the international community. A carefully navigated resolution could potentially allow Lithuania to uphold a degree of its values while also restoring some measure of economic stability. By finding a way to re-engage with China economically without fully abandoning its prior stances, Lithuania could establish a framework for small states to balance their ideals and interests in a complex geopolitical landscape. However, the path forward remains uncertain, and any resolution is likely to invite close scrutiny from both domestic and international observers. Lithuania's experience carries important lessons for other small states facing similar dilemmas in an era of great power competition. It highlights the high costs that can come with taking unilateral stands against major powers, even when those stands are morally grounded. It also underscores the frequent gap between rhetorical support from allies and their willingness to share in the economic pain that can result from challenging a major trading partner like China. As Lithuania navigates this potential diplomatic reset with China, it will need to balance its desire for economic stability with its commitment to its values and its relationships with other global partners. The outcome of these efforts will have significant implications not just for Lithuania, but for other small nations seeking to chart their course in an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. The outcomes of Lithuania's story will be significant not just for the Baltic nation itself, but for other countries navigating an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. Can a small state chart a balanced course after taking a major values-driven stance? Will any resolution with China be seen as principled pragmatism or a reluctant concession? These are the questions that Lithuania's experience raises, and the answers will have implications far beyond its borders.
美方声称要经营中国，但不寻求冲突。实际上，美方所谓的竞争，就是全方位的遏制 打压，就是你死我活的零和博弈。如果美方不踩刹车，继续沿着错误的道路狂飙下去，再多的护栏也挡不住脱轨翻车，陷入对抗冲突。
The rising tensions between the United States and China have reached a boiling point, with China issuing a warning to the U.S. through its state media. In an editorial published by China Daily, the Chinese Communist Party's largest English-language publication, Beijing has called on Washington to cooperate and avoid a potentially disastrous conflict that could have far-reaching consequences for both nations and the world at large. The editorial highlights the growing concern around the world about the possibility of a military confrontation between the two superpowers, citing remarks made by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at a recent news conference in Beijing. According to the China Daily, Wang Yi's comments are being parsed for clues as to whether such a disastrous scenario can be avoided. At the heart of the current tensions is the issue of Taiwan's independence. China has long claimed Taiwan as an integral part of its territory, while the U.S. considers the island nation a key partner in the Indo-Pacific region. President Joe Biden has even gone so far as to state that the U.S. would defend Taiwan militarily if China were to invade. The China Daily editorial pulls no punches in addressing this contentious issue, warning that the elephant in the room that will always shake the foundations of any attempts to build better relations is the Taiwan question.
Another relationship perhaps to be tested by a second Trump presidency is that between China and the US. Fears then of a trade war and tensions over Taiwan perhaps at top of the trouble spots list.
The editorial goes on to accuse the US of failing to live up to its commitments and engaging in duplicitous behavior. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said by Washington, which, as Wang pointed out, has not only failed to fulfill all commitments it has made to Beijing, but also continually says one thing while doing another, the article states. The tensions between the two countries came to a head in November when President Biden met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in San Francisco. The high-stakes meeting aimed to manage the competitive aspects of the US-China relationship and prevent the outbreak of conflict. In a joint statement released after the summit, the two leaders stressed the importance of responsibly managing competitive aspects of the relationship, preventing conflict, maintaining open lines of communication, cooperating on areas of shared interest, upholding the UN Charter, and all countries treating each other with respect and finding a way to live alongside each other peacefully. However, China has called on the US to back up its words with actions and work towards rebuilding trust between the two nations. The China Daily editorial warns that the US should align its actions with the San Francisco vision of the way forward for bilateral relations, adding that there are quite a few areas where the two sides can find firm common ground on which to rebuild trust and mutual respect. When reached for comment by Newsweek, the Chinese embassy referred to Foreign Minister Wang Yi's remarks at the news conference. Wang said, "There has been some improvement in China-US relations since the summit in San Francisco. This meets the interests and wishes of people of both countries and the world. But it has to be pointed out that US misperception toward China continues, and US promises are not truly fulfilled. The US has been devising various tactics to suppress China and kept lengthening its unilateral sanctions list, reaching bewildering levels of unfathomable absurdity." Wang Yi urged the US to be clear-eyed about the trend of the times, view China's development objectively and rationally, engage in exchanges with China proactively and pragmatically, and act to fulfill its commitments. He expressed hope that the US will work with China to bring the relationship back on the track of stable, sound, and sustainable development. In addition to the tensions over Taiwan, China has also issued a travel advisory to its citizens visiting the US, warning them of unwarranted interrogations and harassment at US airports. The move comes after several Chinese students and workers were subjected to questioning, searches, and even deportation by US authorities. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs said on its WeChat account that the ministry and the Chinese embassy and consulates in the US have lodged a solemn representation to the US, and we remind those who plan to travel to the US to be aware of these situations. Since November, at least 8 Chinese students with valid documents have been searched, interrogated, or sent back just from Washington Dulles International Airport alone, according to a tally by Chinese media. In January, China Science Daily reported that a biological sciences PhD candidate was deported by officials at Dulles Airport in December as she was trying to return to the U.S. to continue her studies. The report said the student was subjected to a body search and spent 8 hours in an interrogation room followed by 12 hours in solitary confinement. A Pew Research poll released in late April found that about half of Americans see China as a major foreign policy concern. Similarly, a Gallup poll from the previous month revealed that over 40% of Americans consider China the United States' top adversary. U.S.-China relations have been strained over America's support for Taiwan. Despite the tensions, China has issued an election message to both Trump and Harris, reaffirming its commitment to non-interference in U.S. internal affairs. Liu Pengyu, a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in the U.S., told Newsweek, "The presidential election is the domestic affair of the United States. China, committed to the principle of non-interference in others' internal affairs, will not interfere in the U.S.'s presidential election." At the same time, China has expressed hope for cooperation with the U.S. regardless of the election outcome. Developing China-U.S. relations is in the fundamental interest of our two peoples and two countries and meets the expectations of the international community, Pengyu said. He called for mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation to advance stable and sustainable bilateral relations. The two main candidates in the U.S. presidential election have taken different approaches to China. Harris has vowed to continue the tough approach taken by the Biden administration and has reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitments to Taiwan. "We will continue to support Taiwan's self-defense, consistent with our long-standing policy," she said. Trump, on the other hand, has been non-committal on whether he would send U.S. troops to defend Taiwan. During the 2020 vice presidential debate, Harris criticized Trump's trade war with China as costly to American jobs and the economy. "You lost that trade war. You lost it." What ended up happening is that because of a so-called trade war with China, America lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. Farmers have experienced bankruptcy because of it. "We are in a manufacturing recession because of it," she said. Trump, for his part, has made confronting China a central part of his America First economic strategy. He has imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese imports in an effort to protect U.S. industries and stimulate domestic growth.
In jeopardy.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
On the campaign trail, Trump regularly accused China of stealing America.
China has also issued a warning to Trump over the issue of Taiwan. The Chinese embassy in Washington has cautioned Trump to handle Taiwan-related issues prudently in order to avoid severe damage to China-U.S. relations and cross-strait peace and stability. The Taiwan question is the most important and most sensitive issue in China-U.S. relations, Liu Pengyu, the embassy spokesperson, told Newsweek. He urged the U.S. government to earnestly abide by the One China principle and the 3 China-U.S. joint communiques. The warning comes after the U.S. approved a $2 billion arms package for Taiwan, which includes surface-to-air missile defense systems and radar. China strongly opposes the arms sale, calling it a serious undermining of its sovereignty and security interests.
Chinese soldiers preparing for battle. This is what Beijing wants to show the world. With each military drill, China is drawing ever closer circles around Taiwan. China has a clear goal: to gain control over the island.
China will surely be reunified.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes, that's the commitment we made.
The United States is building up its military presence in the region and is practicing how to sink Chinese ships.
We're not going to come to an agreement over Taiwan.
Wait for the unification to be achieved.
peacefully, I hope, non-peacefully, I dread.
In response, the Chinese embassy said, the sales seriously undermine China's sovereignty and security interests, harm China-US relations and peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, and send a gravely wrong message to Taiwan independence, separatist forces. China strongly condemns and firmly opposes this and has lodged serious protests with the US. The complex relationship between the US, China, and Taiwan is based on the One China policy, which was established in the 1970s. Under this policy, the US acknowledges China's stance that there is only one China and that Taiwan is a part of it, while not explicitly endorsing China's sovereignty over Taiwan. This ambiguous stance allows the US to maintain unofficial relations with Taiwan and support it in various ways without officially recognizing it as an independent state. China has also warned Trump against renewing the trade war between the two countries. The Chinese embassy in Washington has stated that raising tariffs on Chinese goods could harm the US economy. There is no winner in a trade war, nor will the world benefit from it. Further increasing tariffs on Chinese products will only significantly drive up the cost of imported goods, inflict more loss on American companies and consumers, and will eventually backfire, Liu Pengyu said.
Will that then hurt Americans?
Generally, in a trade war, one thing that we know for sure is that the global economy does worse.
During his campaign, Trump pledged to impose 60% tariffs on all Chinese exports, a move that would significantly impact China's economy. Tariffs are central to Trump's America First economic strategy, designed to protect U.S. industries and stimulate domestic growth.
Well, more tariffs are on the horizon, Stuart. Trump would like to impose a tariff of at least 60% on all Chinese imports. An Australian investment bank estimated that this would cost about 8% of Chinese exports. And another study by the Swiss bank UBS said that this could slow China's growth by 2.5%. That's half of its annual growth rate. So potentially huge consequences then for an economy that's already been slowing down and is not in good shape. If this takes place, this round two of the trade war, it won't be like the first time, because back in 2018 when Donald Trump kicked that off, it was well before China's real estate crisis, and now the situation just isn't the same. So for leaders here, the return of Donald Trump to the White House doesn't come at a good time. That said, Trump 2.0 is not all bad news for Beijing, especially from a long-term vision perspective. Trump's America First policy, his fascination with authoritarian leaders, his friendship with Elon Musk, and the fact that he is so divisive, well, all of that works in Beijing's favor. President Xi Jinping famously says, the East is rising and the West is declining, and a second Trump presidency could very well fit into this narrative.
Dean of the School of Business and Management at Notre Dame de Namur University, John M. Veitch, told Newsweek there will be significant losses to the economy if a trade war is reignited. China is not in a particularly strong economic situation right now. They have seen weakening in important sectors like construction and real estate, he said. Their central bank has recently implemented new monetary policies and tools to try to stimulate capital markets and the economy broadly. Veitch added, trade wars always have very asymmetric impacts on an economy overall. Consumers will lose as they pay higher prices for imported goods and likely higher prices for U.S. goods whose prices were previously held in check by possible imports. This will be a large loss to the economy as a whole, and probably a loss that consumers themselves will feel, especially given U.S. consumer sensitivity to past inflation. In response to Trump's comments suggesting he would impose massive tariffs on China if it went into Taiwan and that Taiwan might have to pay for U.S. protection, a spokesperson for China's Taiwan Affairs Office said the people of Taiwan had a clear understanding of U.S. policy. Whether the United States is trying to protect or harm Taiwan, I believe most of our Taiwan compatriots have already made a rational judgment and know very clearly that what the United States pursues is always America first. Zhu Fenglian told a regular news briefing. Taiwan at any time may turn from a pawn to a discarded child, Fenglian said, without referring to Trump by name. In 2018, the U.S. imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese imports, initially targeting core materials like steel and aluminum before expanding to a wide range of products. China retaliated by imposing its own tariffs on American agricultural exports, which sharply impacted U.S. farmers and producers.